A young millionaire noticed that a child was stealing products from his supermarket. When he followed her home, he was shocked to discover the reason. The clock read exactly 6:15 in the morning when Thomas Berger opened his eyes. He didn't even need the alarm. His body was already programmed with the precision of a Swiss timepiece. 15 minutes for his morning exercise, 20 for a shower, 10 to get dressed. At 7 o'clock sharp, his driver would be waiting at the entrance to the building. Thomas liked order. Actually, he needed it. At 40 years old, he had built a small empire in the food sector, based on meticulously planned routines and an almost obsessive efficiency. It was no wonder that his supermarket chain, Burgermart, had expanded from a single store to 27 locations in just 8 years. "Good morning, Mr. Berger," greeted Frank, his driver for the past 5 years, opening the door of the black sedan. Thomas merely nodded, immediately immersing himself in the emails on his phone. The early hours of the morning were sacred for planning the day. While the car slid through traffic, he responded to messages, checked sales reports, and organized his meetings. The world outside, buildings, people in a hurry, the sky heavy with clouds, barely existed for him. "We'll arrive in 5 minutes, mate, sir," Frank announced. Thomas put away his phone and adjusted his navy blue tie. Today was the quarterly security meeting, something he considered necessary but tedious. He preferred the expansion or new product meetings, those where he could see the numbers grow, where he could taste success. Burgermart's headquarters occupied a modern glass and steel building in the city's commercial center. Thomas crossed the lobby with firm steps, greeting employees with brief nods. In the elevator, his assistant, Melissa, was already waiting for him with a folder of documents and a coffee prepared exactly the way he liked it. "Good morning, Mr. Berger. The meeting starts in 20 minutes in the main conference room. All the reports are ready, and the head of security asked to add a last-minute topic." Thomas frowned. "What topic?" "He didn't specify, sir. He just said it was a recurring case that deserved attention." The businessman sighed. He hated surprises. They broke his rhythm, diverted his focus, but his expression remained impassive as he sipped his coffee. The meeting began promptly at 8:30. Seated at the head of the long glass table, Thomas listened to each department manager's updates. The theft numbers were acceptable, below the industry average. The security protocols were working well, nothing that deserved more than a few minutes of his attention. That was when Robert E., the head of security, got to the so-called additional topic. "Mr. Berger, we've recorded a peculiar case at our West Side location," he began, adjusting his glasses. "A child, a girl to be precise, has been caught on camera shoplifting small amounts of food, always at the same time, 3 times a week." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "And why is this relevant to this meeting? Apply the standard protocol." Robert cleared his throat. "Well, sir, the protocol for non-repeating minors is a verbal warning and contacting a guardian. The problem is that she's never actually been confronted. She always escapes before security can catch her. And we have no idea who her parents are." "Then improve your approach," Thomas replied curtly. "Next subject." But Robert insisted, which was unusual for the usually discreet head of security. "Sir, there's something different about this case. She never takes candy or toys. It's always basic foods, bread, fruit, milk. And from what we've observed, she seems to know exactly where the cameras are. It's uncommon for someone so young." Thomas felt a flash of irritation. Why were they wasting time on this? "What's your suggestion then, Robert?" "We could adjust the guard's patrol route or maybe install more cameras in that section. Do whatever's necessary. We don't need to spend more meeting time on this." Thomas cut the discussion and moved on to the next item on the agenda. But something strange happened. While the other topics were being discussed, the image of the girl stealing basic foods wouldn't leave his mind. It was like a pebble in his shoe, small but irritating with every step. The meeting ended at noon exactly as planned. Thomas returned to his office, a spacious, minimalist room on the top floor. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, He could see the entire city stretching out to the horizon, his commercial empire growing by the month. He sat at his desk and tried to focus on the financial reports, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the girl mentioned in the meeting. Why was it bothering him so much? Petty thefts were statistics, not issues that required his personal attention. "Melissa," he called through the intercom, "bring me the security logs from the West Side location for the last 2 weeks." 20 minutes later, he was watching the recordings. The quality was good, allowing him to clearly see the girl, small, skinny, brown hair barely combed. She always wore the same faded jacket, too large for her. Her movements were quick and calculated. She entered the store, took only what was necessary, and left through the least busy checkout lane, taking advantage of the employees' distractions. Thomas found himself admiring the child's efficiency. There was something in her eyes, a determination, a maturity that didn't match someone so young. He looked at the clock. 3:40. According to the logs, she usually appeared on Wednesdays around 4. Today was Wednesday. Thomas stood up abruptly. "Melissa, cancel my appointments for the rest of the day." Something unexpected came up. His assistant looked surprised. In 5 years, he had never cancelled appointments at the last minute. But she only nodded. 30 minutes later, Thomas was in the parking lot of the West Side location inside his car. This was undoubtedly the least profitable branch of the chain, located in a transitional area between the commercial center and the more modest neighborhoods. It was one of the first stores he had opened. Keeping it running was more sentimental than business-oriented, though Thomas would never admit that. At 4:12, he saw her. Even from a distance, he recognized the faded jacket. The girl looked around before entering the store like a little spy on a mission. Thomas waited a few minutes, then followed. Inside the supermarket, he kept his distance. He watched as she only took the essentials, a loaf of bread, some apples, a carton of milk. He also noticed how she constantly checked the position of the employees and the cameras. When the girl headed for the exit, Thomas positioned himself near the door, pretending to examine products on a shelf. He saw her pass by the inattentive cashier and head out to the street. Instead of confronting her, Thomas decided to follow her. Something inside him, a curiosity he hadn't felt in years, drove him to learn more about this child who stole food with such precision. The girl walked quickly, moving away from the commercial center. The streets became narrower, the buildings older. The contrast with Thomas's own world was stark. There were no gleaming glass towers or luxury cars here. Instead, clothes hung from improvised lines between windows, walls were peeling, and sidewalks were cracked. Thomas kept a safe distance, aware that his expensive suit and polished appearance made him stand out as a stranger in that environment. The girl turned down a side street and entered a 3-story apartment building, its facade worn down by time and neglect. He hesitated. How far should he go with this improvised investigation? What did he hope to find? He was about to give up when he saw movement in a second-floor window. The girl appeared briefly, placing something on the sill. It looked like clothing hung out to dry. Acting on impulse, Thomas went into the building. The lobby smelled of mold, and the lighting was dim. He climbed the narrow stairs, trying not to touch the grimy banister. On the second floor, he stopped in front of the door he thought he had seen the girl enter. He heard children's voices inside, the girl's voice, and another, higher-pitched, an even younger child. Thomas moved closer to the door and noticed it was ajar. Through the crack, he witnessed the scene that would change his life forever. The girl was kneeling on the floor of a tiny apartment with almost no furniture, taking items out of her bag. A little boy, no more than 3, with the same brown hair, clapped his hands in excitement. "Look, Leo, I got apples. You like apples, remember?" The girl's voice was soft, almost maternal, despite her young age. "Apple!" the boy exclaimed, grabbing the fruit with his small, chubby hands. The apartment was a single space with a mattress on the floor, a small pile of folded clothes, and very few toys. Most appeared to have been salvaged from the trash and carefully cleaned. But most shocking was the complete absence of adults. "I'll make sandwiches for dinner, okay?" said the girl, slicing the bread with what looked like a butter knife, the only cutting utensil safe enough for a child to use. Thomas felt like he'd been punched in the gut. A memory he had buried decades ago surfaced. Himself at 8 years old, preparing food for his younger sister in an apartment not so different from this one. He staggered back, pressing himself against the hallway wall. This couldn't be real. Those kids couldn't be living alone. Where were their parents? Who was taking care of them? A noise from inside the apartment made him alert. The girl had heard his footsteps. Thomas saw her face peek through the door crack, her eyes wide with terror at the sight of a stranger. "Who are you?" she asked, placing herself protectively in front of her younger brother. Thomas swallowed hard, not knowing what to say. How could he explain he was the owner of the supermarket she stole from? How could he justify his presence there, spying on them? I just wanted to help," was all he managed. The girl frowned, distrustful. "We don't need help. Go away or I'll call my dad." It was an obvious lie, but said with such conviction it almost sounded real. Thomas raised his hands in a peaceful gesture. "All right, I'm leaving. Sorry for scaring you." He backed away slowly, feeling the girl's gaze on him until he reached the stairs. Once on the street, his breathing was unsteady and cold sweat rolled down his back. Those kids were alone, completely alone, and the older one, who couldn't be more than 6, cared for her brother like a mother would. Thomas sat behind the wheel of his luxury car and stared at the building. A whirlwind of emotions churned inside him: shock, compassion, discomfort, and most of all, recognition. That raw, desperate reality was familiar to him in a way that no one in his social circle could imagine. His phone rang. It was Melissa, asking about an urgent decision regarding a new supplier. Thomas hung up without answering. For the first time in years, his perfect routine, his meticulously planned life, felt meaningless. Something had cracked the armor he'd built around himself, letting in a feeling he hadn't allowed in for a long time: vulnerability. Thomas started the car, but he didn't go home or to his office. Instead, he drove to another supermarket chain he couldn't risk being recognized in one of his own stores, and filled a cart with food, hygiene products, and some children's clothing he found in the emergency section. While the cashier scanned his purchases, Thomas wondered what he was doing. Why did he care so much about these particular kids when he knew thousands lived in similar conditions around the city? What had affected him so deeply? Maybe it was the way the girl took responsibility for her brother. Or maybe it was simply the reflection of his own past, a mirror showing what he had spent decades trying to forget. When he returned to the building, it was already getting dark. He left the bags by the apartment door and left quickly, without knocking or calling out. He didn't want to scare the children again. In the car, he took one last look at the second-floor window. The light was on now, a weak glow contrasting with the growing darkness. Thomas took a deep breath. His untouchable routine had just been completely shaken, and for the first time in a long while, he had no idea what to do next. Thomas swirled the whiskey glass between his fingers, watching the amber liquid reflect the dim lamplight. It was almost 1 in the morning, and he was still sitting in the leather armchair in his apartment on the 20th floor, unable to sleep. The panoramic view of the brightly lit city, which usually filled him with pride, now only highlighted the gulf between his world and those children's, Claire and Leo. He couldn't get their names out of his head. He had heard the girl call her younger brother that night in the dark, musty corridor. Leo, a little boy who could barely speak, entirely dependent on his 6-year-old sister, a sister who stole food to keep him fed. Thomas took a sip of the drink, feeling the alcohol burn his throat. How was it possible that in a city where he owned 27 supermarkets, children needed to steal to eat? His phone vibrated on the coffee table, another message from his lawyer about a new acquisition in the North District. Thomas ignored it. For the first time in years, business felt distant, almost irrelevant. He got up and walked to the window. Below, cars still moved despite the late hour. Little points of light gliding along like ants. Somewhere in that vastness, 2 children slept alone on a mattress on the floor. "What am I doing?" he murmured to himself. The bags he'd left at the apartment door wouldn't solve anything. By tomorrow or the day after, the food would be gone, and they'd be in the same situation. Thomas picked up his phone and opened his contacts. He scrolled down until he found the name he was looking for. Daniel Reeves, his personal assistant for confidential matters. It was late, but Daniel was available at any hour. That's what he was paid an astronomical salary for. "Mr. Berger," Daniel's sleepy voice came through the line. "I need you to do something tomorrow morning," Thomas said without preamble. "It's a delicate matter, and I want absolute discretion." As he explained what he wanted, Thomas felt a strange mix of relief and discomfort. Was he doing the right thing, or just easing his own conscience? After hanging up, he returned to the armchair and closed his eyes. Claire's image, so small and yet so responsible, merged with another image buried for decades. Himself at age 8, sneaking around a supermarket, heart pounding as he slipped a can of tuna into the inner pocket of his worn coat. Sleep came slowly, and when it finally did, it brought restless dreams filled with dark hallways and frightened children. Sastakuwasi son of the next morning, Thomas woke up to his alarm at 6:15 as always, but for the first time in years, he stayed in bed a few extra minutes, staring at the ceiling. His once sacred routine seemed to have lost some of its shine. He followed his morning rituals, though without his usual robotic efficiency. In the car, instead of checking emails, he gazed out the window, watching the city wake up. Frankan, his driver, noticed the change but was too discreet to comment. At the office, the first thing he did was call Daniel in for a private talk. "I've arranged everything already, sir," the assistant informed him as soon as he entered. Tall and thin, impeccably dressed, Daniel was the definition of discreet efficiency. "The first delivery will be made this afternoon, as requested, and I've started gathering information about the children." Thomas nodded. "Good. I want weekly reports on their situation, and the deliveries should continue indefinitely, always at the same time." Daniel made some notes on his tablet. "May I ask why you're so interested in this particular case, sir?" Thomas's gaze hardened. "No, you may not." The meeting ended there. Thomas threw himself into work, trying to regain his usual focus, but every hour he found himself checking the clock, calculating how long until the planned delivery. At 4:20 in the afternoon, Claire was returning home carrying her small bag of groceries. Today had been a good day. She managed to grab 2 apples and a pack of cookies, and even a small juice box for Leo. The new security guard was inattentive, always looking at his phone, which made everything easier. She climbed the apartment building stairs lightly, eager to show her brother the orange juice, his favorite fruit. But as soon as she reached the second-floor hallway, she stopped abruptly. There was something at the door of the apartment, several large plastic bags. Her heart sped up. Could it be a trap? Had someone discovered her and Leo? Was someone waiting inside to take them away? She approached cautiously, like a wild animal sniffing for danger. The bags had the logo of a supermarket she didn't recognize. It wasn't the one she usually visited. Looking inside one, she saw packages of rice, beans, pasta, cans of tomato sauce, and other non-perishable foods. Claire looked around, confused. Who would leave this here? Was it really for them? She remembered then the man in the suit from the day before. The stranger who had shown up in the hallway and then fled. Could it be him? Heart pounding, Claire gathered up the bags and quickly went inside, locking the door behind her. "Claire!" Leo ran over to her, hugging her legs. "You took so long." "Look what I brought, Leo," she said, kneeling to hug her brother. "Orange juice, sir, your favorite." The boy's eyes lit up as she opened the box and slipped in the straw. "And there's more," she went on, pointing to the mysterious bags. "A lot more." While Leo drank his juice, Claire emptied the bags on the floor, sorting through the items. There was enough food for weeks. Not just basic items, but also dried fruit, cereal, and even some chocolate. One bag contained cleaning products, soap, shampoo, and toilet paper, items she usually couldn't grab at the supermarket because they were too big to hide. In the last bag, something made her freeze. Clothes, small t-shirts, pants, socks, and even a new coat in Leo's size. And there were clothes for her too. Claire sat on the floor, stunned. This made no sense. No one did something like this for free. Her mother always said that if something seemed too good to be true, it was probably a trap. But the things were there, real and tangible, and they needed them so badly. "What's that, Claire?" asked Leo, pointing to the new clothes. "They're presents," she replied hesitantly, "but I don't know who they're from." As she arranged the food in her improvised storage areas, Claire tried to process what was happening. Could it be some neighbor? But no one in the building had money for that. The landlord? Impossible, he never appeared, just sent someone to collect the rent, which their mother had paid 6 months in advance before she left. Suddenly, fear gripped her. What if it was a social worker? Someone gathering evidence to take them away? No, she couldn't allow that. They couldn't separate her and Leo. She had promised her mother she would take care of him until she came back. She looked at her little brother, who was now trying on one of the new t-shirts, laughing as he struggled to fit his head through the opening. The soft, colorful fabric was so different from the worn clothes they usually wore. Claire took a deep breath. She would accept the gifts for now, but she would stay on guard. If someone tried to take them, she would be ready to run away with Leo. She'd had a plan for that for weeks, ever since the food their mother had left began to run out, and she realized they were on their own. That night, for the first time in months, they ate until they were full. Claire made pasta with tomato sauce, a luxury they hadn't had in a long time. She even put aside the chocolates for another occasion. "We should save them," she told Leo, who only protested a little. Later, lying on the old mattress, Leo fell asleep quickly, his stomach full and his body warmed by the new pajamas. Claire, however, remained awake, staring at the stained ceiling, wondering about the identity of their mysterious benefactor and what he might want in return. The next day, Daniel entered Thomas's office with a slim folder. "The deliveries were made as requested, sir," he reported. "And here is the preliminary information I got on the children." Thomas took the folder, trying to keep a neutral expression despite the anxiety he felt. "Claire and Leonardo Morgan," he read aloud. "Mother, Eliza Morgan, 26 years old. No known whereabouts for about 2 months. Father, unknown. Not listed on either child's birth certificate. There were more details. Address, the children's dates of birth. Claire had just turned 6. Leo was 3 years and 2 months old. The mother's last registered job, a waitress at a restaurant that closed 4 months ago. Claire's school history, enrolled in a local public school, but with frequent absences in the last month. "How did you get this information so quickly?" Thomas asked, impressed despite himself. Daniel gave a small smile. "I have my methods, sir, completely legal, of course." Thomas continued reading. No record of other relatives, no grandfathers, no aunts, no one who might be taking care of those children. "Was the door locked when they made the delivery?" he asked, recalling how he'd found the apartment door the previous day. "Yes. The person I hired left the bags at the door and watched from a distance. A small girl arrived about 20 minutes later and took everything inside." Thomas nodded, feeling an irrational sense of relief. At least they had food now. At least they weren't starving. "Keep the deliveries going," he ordered, closing the folder. "Once a week, always the same basic items, but mix in a few different things. Fresh fruit and," he hesitated for a moment, "books, children's books." Daniel looked surprised at that last request, but merely nodded. "Yes, sir." When his assistant left, Thomas turned his attention to the documents on his desk. Contracts, reports, proposals. But the words blurred before his eyes, unable to hold his attention as before. One question echoed in his mind. Was sending anonymous deliveries of food enough? Those kids were alone, completely alone. Food and clothes wouldn't change that. He closed his eyes and massaged his temples. A headache was starting to form, persistent and irritating. Suddenly, a vivid memory resurfaced. Himself at 7, sitting on the emergency stairwell of the building where they lived, waiting for his mother to come home from her second shift. It was late, almost midnight, and he was afraid to sleep alone in the apartment. His sister, Sophie, only 3 at the time, was already asleep, but he stayed awake on guard. Helen Berger was a strong woman. Raising 2 kids alone after her husband abandoned them, she worked 2 jobs, cleaning during the day and pumping gas at night. She came home exhausted, fingers red from cleaning products and feet swollen, but she always had a smile for her children. "Tommy," she would say, using the nickname he now despised. "We'll get through this, one day at a time, but we'll make it." And in a way, they did. They never had to go to a shelter, never got separated. But it was years of constant struggle, late bills, second-hand clothes, and carefully rationed food to last until the next paycheck. And there were those moments Thomas had buried so deeply that he sometimes pretended they'd never happened. Moments when need outweighed the principles his mother tried to instill in him. Like that particularly harsh winter when Sophie got sick and the medicine cost more than they could afford. Helen worked extra hours, but it still wasn't enough. That was when Thomas, at 10, decided to help. The small corner market was owned by an elderly man who often dozed behind the counter. Thomas figured out exactly what he could take without being noticed. Cough syrup, throat lozenges, children's pain relievers. Items small enough to fit in the pockets of his oversized coat. It worked several times. Until one day, the owner's son was in the store. Thomas was caught with a bottle of cough syrup in his pocket. He still felt shame when he remembered what happened next. The man grabbed his arm tightly, threatening to call the police. Thomas cried, pleaded, explaining that his little sister was sick and his mother had no money for medicine. Something in the boy's desperation must have touched the man, because instead of calling the authorities, he called Helen at work. She came running, face pale with worry and embarrassment. She apologized repeatedly, promising to pay for what her son had tried to steal. Thomas would never forget the look on his mother's face that night. It wasn't anger, not even disappointment, just deep exhaustion, a crushing weight. "I understand why you did it, Tommy," she said later, sitting on the edge of his bed. "But promising ourselves never to steal, lie or hurt others even when things are hard, especially when they're hard, is what keeps us human. Do you understand?" He nodded, though he didn't fully understand at the time. Today, at 40, running a corporate empire built on efficiency and profit, Thomas wondered if he'd really learned his mother's lesson. Opening his eyes, he realized he'd spent nearly half an hour lost in memories. Irritated with himself, he tried to get back to work, but his concentration was completely gone. He stood and walked to his office window. From there, he could see the west side of the city, where Claire and Leo struggled to survive day after day. "Food isn't enough," he murmured to himself. It never was. His mother never had help. No one showed up at her door with bags of groceries. No one offered a helping hand when she needed it most. Her life was a constant battle, a struggle that eventually consumed her. She died at 48, of a heart attack the doctor said was worsened by years of chronic stress. The dilemma burned within him. He couldn't just ignore those children now that he had found them, but he also didn't know how to truly help, beyond the anonymous deliveries. Should he contact social services? But that might mean the kids would be separated, placed in different foster homes. He knew the system well, cold, bureaucratic, overwhelmed. Should he try to find their mother? But how? And if she had simply abandoned them? Or worse, If something had happened to her. And there was another question. One Thomas barely dared to articulate. How far was he willing to get involved? His carefully structured life had no room for emotional entanglements. He had worked hard to build walls between himself and the world, to protect himself from pain and vulnerability. But those children, especially Claire, with her fierce determination and instinctive protection of her brother, had found a crack in those walls. Thomas took a deep breath and pressed the button on his desk intercom. Melissa appeared at the door almost instantly. "Cancel my appointments for tomorrow afternoon," he instructed. "I have a personal matter to deal with." This matter was more than personal. It was a confrontation with his own past, a decision about what kind of man he truly was. Because deep down, Thomas knew the food he was sending wasn't just for Claire and Leo. It was also for the boy he used to be. The scared boy waiting on the emergency stairwell, hoping anyone would show up to help. Thomas parked the car at a safe distance from the supermarket. He wasn't using his usual black sedan, but a more modest model, rented specifically for this purpose. Even his clothes were different. Jeans, a t-shirt, and an old leather jacket he'd found in the back of his closet. Nothing that screamed CEO of a supermarket chain. He'd been there for nearly an hour, watching the store's entrance. His heart pounded when he finally saw her, Claire, with her characteristic oversized jacket, walking with determined steps toward the supermarket. Alone as always, Thomas took a deep breath and got out of the car. The plan was simple. Approach her before she entered the store. Talk to her. Try to understand her situation better. 2 weeks of anonymous food deliveries weren't enough. He needed to know more. "Claire?" he called gently as he got closer. The girl froze instantly. Her eyes, when they turned to him, held a mix of recognition and fear. "You're the man from the hallway," she said, stepping back, ready to run. Thomas held up his hands in a calming gesture. "You don't need to be afraid. I just want to talk." Claire looked around, as if looking for an escape route. "How do you know my name?" That was a tough question. Thomas hesitated. Lying now would set a foundation of mistrust, but telling the whole truth might be frightening. "I asked around," he finally answered, opting for a half-truth. "Listen, I know you don't know me, but I have a proposal. How about we get a hot chocolate over there?" He pointed to a small cafe across the street. "It's a public place, lots of people around. You'll be safe." Claire narrowed her eyes, suspicious. "Why?" "Because it's cold and hot chocolate is good," Thomas said, attempting a smile. Seeing that she remained unconvinced, he added, "Look, I know you take things from this supermarket. I'm not here to turn you in. Actually, I'm the owner." Claire's eyes widened. "The owner? Of the whole supermarket?" Thomas nodded. "Of the entire Burger Mart chain, actually. My name is Thomas Burger." That changed something in Claire's expression. The fear gave way to cautious curiosity. She still kept her distance, but she no longer seemed about to flee. "So you're going to turn me over to the police?" she said, not as a question but as a statement. "No," Thomas replied, keeping his voice calm. "If I wanted to do that, I would have done it weeks ago. Like I said, I just want to talk." Claire bit her lip, thinking, "And if I don't want to? Then you walk away and so do I. No police, no trouble. But," Thomas hesitated, "if you come with me, I promise it'll be worth it. You can order whatever you want at the cafe." That last part seemed to do the trick. Claire still hesitated for a few seconds, but finally nodded in agreement. The cafe was small and cozy, with tall stools along the counter and a few tables scattered about. There weren't many customers at that hour, just an older gentleman reading a newspaper in one corner and a teenage couple sharing a milkshake. Thomas led Claire to a table near the window where they could see the street. He noticed that the girl chose a seat that allowed her to keep an eye on the door, an instinct for survival he knew well. A waitress approached with a friendly smile. "What can I get for you?" "A hot chocolate for me," Thomas ordered. "And for you, Claire." Claire glanced warily at the laminated menu on the table. "I'll have a hot chocolate too. And can I have a slice of that pie?" She pointed to the display of desserts behind the counter. "Of course." 1 slice of apple pie as well, Thomas confirmed to the waitress. When they were alone, an uncomfortable silence followed. Claire stared at the table, her small fingers nervously playing with the paper napkin. "So," Thomas began, trying to sound casual. "You like apple pie?" Claire shrugged. "Never tried it. It looks good in pictures in books." Something about that simple answer made Thomas's heart ache. A 6-year-old who had never tasted apple pie. What other simple childhood experiences had she missed? "I'm sure you'll like it," he said, keeping his voice steady. "It's my favorite too." Another silence. Thomas realized small talk wouldn't get them anywhere. He needed to be direct but gentle. "Claire, I know you take food from my supermarket," he finally said. "I'm not mad. I just want to understand why." The girl folded her arms and looked out the window. Her entire posture screamed defensiveness. "To eat," she replied bluntly. "I see," Thomas nodded. "And why do you have to take it instead of buying it? Where are your parents?" Claire's expression grew even more closed off. Her eyes, large and dark for someone so small, seemed filled with a wisdom and pain beyond her years. The waitress returned with 2 hot chocolates and the pie. Claire immediately wrapped her small hands around the mug, as if soaking up its warmth. Thomas sighed, realizing he was moving too fast. "Look, I'm not trying to pressure you. I just want to help." Something about that statement, spoken sincerely, seemed to reach her. She took a small sip of the hot chocolate and then, still not looking directly at Thomas, began to speak. "My mom left us," she said softly. "She just walked out one day and never came back." Thomas felt a knot in his throat. "When did that happen, Claire?" 2 years ago. I was only 4 and Leo was still a baby." 2 years, an eternity for such a young child, forced to grow up and care for a younger sibling. "And there's no other adult? Grandparents, uncles?" Claire shook her head. "It's just us. Mom always said so. She had no family, and our dad never existed." Thomas tried to keep his composure. "And how have you survived all this time on your own?" Claire picked up her fork and prodded the pie, separating a tiny piece. "The neighbor lady next door looked after us for a while, but then she moved too." She placed the minuscule bit of pie in her mouth, her eyes lighting up momentarily at the sweet taste before turning serious again. "Then I had to figure it out. I learned to cook 'em, to change Leo's clothes. Mom left some money, but it ran out. Now I take what we need." Thomas nodded, encouraging her to continue. "So I started taking food from your supermarket," Claire went on, now looking right at him, as if daring him to judge her. "I know it's wrong to steal. Mom always said that. But Leo needed to eat, and so did I." "You did what you had to do to survive," Thomas said gently. "And to take care of your brother. That shows a lot of courage." Claire blinked, clearly taken aback by his response. Maybe she had expected anger or accusations, not understanding. "You're not mad?" she asked, her voice tiny. Thomas shook his head. "No, I'm worried, and I want to help you if you'll let me." Claire studied him with those perceptive eyes. "How, you're the one who sent the food, aren't you? Those bags at our door?" Thomas nodded. "Why?" asked Claire. "You don't even know me?" It was a fair question. Thomas considered his answer, trying to be honest without overwhelming her with details of his own past. "Because I saw that you and your brother needed help, and when I was a kid, I sometimes needed help too, but there wasn't always someone there." Claire kept taking small bites of pie as she regarded him. "Do you think my mom abandoned us?" she asked suddenly, a rare vulnerability in her voice. The question caught Thomas off guard. How could he answer that? Saying yes might confirm Claire's worst fears. Saying no might give her false hope. "I don't know, Claire," he answered honestly. "Sometimes adults go through problems they can't solve easily. I don't know what happened with your mom, but I think we should find out. Do you know where she worked?" Claire nodded. "A restaurant called the Blue Moon. She was a waitress. I went there once, but the big man at the door said she didn't work there anymore and sent me away." Thomas made a mental note to investigate that restaurant. "What's your mom's full name?" "Eliza Morgan," Claire replied. "Same as ours." I'm Claire Morgan, and Leo is Leonardo Morgan. Thomas already knew from Daniel's investigation, but he let Claire share, sensing she needed to feel in control. Claire, I know it's scary to trust a stranger, Thomas said after a moment, but I want you to know I'll keep sending food and whatever else you need. And I'll try to find out what happened to your mom. Claire finished her pie, discreetly licking her fingers to gather the last crumbs. Why do you care so much? She asked. What do you get out of helping us? It was so direct, so adult, that Thomas almost laughed. But there was nothing funny about the situation. Why did he care? Was it just guilt? A rich man seeing poor children? Was it identifying with his own past? Or something else he couldn't yet name? Because it's the right thing to do, he finally answered. And because no one should go through what you're going through alone. Claire was silent for a long moment. Then she said, in a voice so low Thomas almost didn't hear, Leo's scared of sleeping when it rains a lot. Sometimes I am too. The simplicity of her confession made Thomas's throat tighten. It was a piece of trust, a glimpse of the real Claire behind her brave facade. That's normal, he said gently. We're all afraid sometimes. Claire nodded as though confirming a theory. She finished her hot chocolate and set the mug down carefully. I need to go. Leo's alone only until 5. I told him I'd be back by then. Thomas checked his watch. It was 4:40. I can drive you if you want. Claire shook her head firmly. No. My mum said never to get in a car with strangers. Your mum was right, Thomas agreed, respecting her decision. Can I at least give you something to take to Leo? Claire's eyes shone with interest, though she tried not to show it. Like what? Thomas called the waitress and asked for a slice of pie to go, plus 2 hot chocolates in disposable cups. While they waited, he took a business card and wrote his personal cell phone number on the back. Claire, I want you to keep this. It's my number. If you need anything at all, you can call me, day or night. Claire took the card, examining it curiously. I've never used a real phone, just the toy one we had in daycare. Do you know the numbers? Thomas asked. Yes, my mom taught me. I can count to 100 and I know all the letters too. Thomas smiled, genuinely impressed by her intelligence and resilience. I'm sure you could figure out how to call if you needed to. Are there public phones near your place? Claire nodded. On the corner by the little market. The waitress returned with the to-go order. Thomas paid, leaving a generous tip, and handed the bag to Claire. Thank you, she said, hugging it to her chest. She hesitated for a moment, then added, Leo's going to like the pie. He's never had it either. They walked out of the cafe together. Thomas wanted to follow her home, make sure she got there safely, but he knew that would be crossing a line. Claire needed to trust him willingly, not feel watched or controlled. Can I see you again? He asked as they reached the corner. Maybe next week, same time. Claire seemed to consider it. Maybe, she finally said, but I don't know if I'll come back to the supermarket. It doesn't have to be there. We can meet at the cafe. I'll bring more pie. That elicited a small smile from Claire, the first one Thomas had seen. It was timid, reserved, but it still brightened her childish face in a way that made his heart clench. Okay, she agreed, but if you don't show up, I won't wait around. Fair enough, Thomas said. Monday, 4 o'clock. Claire nodded and then, without another word, turned and walked quickly in the direction of home. Thomas watched until she turned the corner and disappeared. Back in his car, Thomas sat for a long time, processing everything he had heard. Claire's story confirmed his suspicions. Their mother had disappeared without explanation, leaving 2 children completely alone. Instinct told him to call social services immediately and report the situation. That was the standard procedure, the logical and legally correct path. The children needed adult supervision, a suitable home, a caretaker, but Thomas knew the system. At best, Claire and Leo would be placed in temporary foster care, possibly ending up in separate homes. At worst, they might be split up right away, losing the only stable bond they had, each other. Besides, There was the mystery of the mother. From Claire's account, the disappearance had been sudden and unexplained. Eliza Morgan had left her children at home, saying she'd be back for dinner. It didn't sound like a planned abandonment. What could have happened? An accident? A sudden illness? Or something worse? Thomas started the car but didn't drive home or to the office. Instead, he punched Blue Moon Restaurant into the GPS and followed the directions. He knew he was getting more involved than he should. His organized, predictable life was being disrupted by this mystery, by these children. But now that he had looked into Claire's eyes, heard her story, he couldn't just go back to his routine and pretend none of it existed. The Blue Moon was 20 minutes away, in an area of the city Thomas rarely visited. It wasn't fancy, but it didn't look suspicious or dangerous either. Just a middle-class establishment, with a blue and white facade and a small crescent moon on the sign. Parking across the street, Thomas gazed at the restaurant, feeling oddly nervous. What was he doing here? What did he expect to find? And more importantly, how far was he willing to go to help two children he barely knew? He had no answers to those questions. He only knew he couldn't ignore the plea for help in Claire's eyes, even if she was too proud to voice it. The restaurant was one of the most upscale in town, with soft lighting and a minimalist decor. Thomas spun the glass of red wine in his fingers, distracted. On the other side of the table, Sophie watched her brother intently. "You still haven't told me why you wanted to have dinner in the middle of the week," she commented. "Usually, you're too busy with your supermarkets for spontaneous dinners." Thomas raised his eyes. His younger sister, now 37, was the only person in the world who truly knew him. While he had chosen the business world, Sophie had become a social worker, dealing directly with at-risk children. "I need your professional opinion on something," he finally said. Sophie raised an eyebrow. "My professional opinion? That's new." Thomas hesitated, organizing his thoughts. "I met two kids, a 6-year-old girl and a 3-year-old boy. They were living alone. The girl said their mother abandoned them 2 years ago." Sophie set down her fork, suddenly on high alert. 2 years? And you're sure they're really alone?" "From what I've seen, yes, the girl is taking care of her brother. She's been stealing food from my supermarket to keep them going." "Why haven't you called social services?" Sophie asked, sounding professional, almost accusatory. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "I've been sending them food. And I'm trying to build trust with the girl to better understand what's going on. Thomas, no matter how much food you send, kids can't live on their own. It's dangerous and illegal." I know, but the system doesn't always work, Sophie. You, of all people, know that." Sophie studied him for a long moment. "This isn't about those kids, is it? It's about us? About what happened after Mum died?" Thomas looked away. "You see yourself in that girl," Sophie continued softly. "That boy of 12, taking care of his little sister, afraid the system would separate us." "It's not that simple," Thomas muttered. "Then explain it, Tommy. Why these particular kids? Why not every child in need who steals from your supermarkets?" Thomas had no answer. Or maybe he did, but wasn't ready to admit it. "Look," Sophie reached across the table and touched his hand. "I understand what you're feeling, but if you're really worried about their well-being, you need to do the right thing. You can't keep two kids living on their own just because you have a savior complex." "It's not a complex," Thomas protested, lacking conviction. "Then what is it? Do you really want to help these kids? Or are you trying to make up for our past? For all the times you had to be the adult when you were still a child?" Sophie's question hit Thomas like a punch. It was the very question he'd been avoiding since he first saw Claire. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe both." Sophie squeezed his hand gently. "Tommy, you can't replace their mother, just like no one could replace ours. If you really want to help, let the professionals step in." Thomas nodded vaguely, but the doubt remained, gnawing at him. What did he truly want? To help Claire and Leo, or to soothe the ghosts of his own past? The question lingered even as he smiled and changed the subject, talking about new corporate projects. But Sophie's words would continue to haunt him in the days to come, like a wound that refused to heal. Claire was making a sandwich for Leo when she heard knocking at the door, not the familiar tapping of Mrs. Garcia next door, who sometimes brought homemade cookies. These knocks were firm, official. Her heart pounded. Nobody ever knocked like that. "Leo," she whispered to her brother, who was playing with a little plastic truck Thomas had included in one of the food deliveries. "Be very quiet, okay? Don't make a sound." The knocking sounded again, more insistent. "Claire Morgan, Leo Morgan. My name is Andrea Williams from Child Protective Services. I need to speak with you." Panic surged through Claire. Child Protective Services. She knew those words. Back in school, before she had stopped attending to care for Leo, a teacher had mentioned them after noticing she wore the same worn-out shoes for weeks. Claire understood what it meant. People who took children away from their homes. "I know you're in there," Andrea continued. "Please open the door. I just want to talk." Claire looked around frantically. There was no way to run. The only exit was the front door, and they were on the second floor. The windows were too high. "Leo," she said softly, trying to keep her voice calm despite her fear. "We're going to play hide and seek. You hide in the closet and don't come out until I call you, okay?" The boy nodded, his big eyes accepting the game without question. Claire guided him to the small built-in closet where they kept their few clothes, helping him squeeze in among the hangers. "Don't make a sound, even if you hear voices. That's the trick of the game," she explained. Leo put his finger to his lips, going shh very seriously. Claire kissed his forehead before closing the closet door. The knocking continued. Claire took a deep breath, trying to think. Thomas had given her a phone number for emergencies. This was definitely an emergency. Maybe he could help. She kept the card carefully under the mattress. Claire grabbed it with trembling hands. Along with it were some coins she'd saved, enough for a call from the public phone on the corner. She had to leave without being seen. She tiptoed to the door and peeked through the peephole. A middle-aged woman with brown hair in a neat bun, wearing a navy blazer, was waiting patiently. A tall man in a dark suit stood next to her. "Claire, please," the woman called, as if sensing she was being watched. "We got an anonymous tip that there might be children living here alone. We need to check if you're okay." Claire backed away. She couldn't open the door. If she did, they'd take Leo away. There was a window in the bathroom that led to the fire escape. It was small, but so was Claire. With a determined move, she went to the bathroom, climbed onto the toilet, and managed to open the window and squeeze through. The metal of the fire escape was cold under her feet, since she hadn't had time to put on shoes. Carefully, she climbed down the rusty steps, praying they wouldn't creak. Once on the ground floor, she ran like she'd never run before. The public phone was just 2 blocks away, but it felt like a marathon. Claire ran non-stop, ignoring the looks from a few pedestrians. When she finally arrived, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely fit the coins into the slot. Luckily, she knew the number by heart. She had repeated Thomas's number in her mind countless times, like a lucky charm. After 3 rings, a male voice answered, "Thomas Berger speaking." "It's Claire," she said, out of breath. "They came to take us." "Claire," Thomas's voice immediately shifted in tone. "Who came for you? Where are you?" "People from the government. Child Protective Services. They're knocking on the apartment door. Leo is hiding in the closet. I climbed out the bathroom window." Her words tumbled out in a panicked stream. "Where are you now?" Thomas asked, his tone controlled but urgent. "At the phone booth on the corner, near home. Stay there. I'm on my way. I'll be there in 15 minutes, tops. But what about Leo? What if they find him?" A brief pause. "Claire, listen carefully. I'm going to help you, but I need you to trust me. Go back to the apartment and open the door for the social worker." "No," Claire exclaimed. "They'll take us." "Claire," Thomas's voice was firm but kind. "If you don't show up, they'll break down the door and take Leo anyway. And if you're not there, it'll be a lot worse. If you're there, at least you'll stay with your brother." Tears ran down Claire's cheeks. He was right. She couldn't abandon Leo. "I'll get there as fast as I can," Thomas continued. "I promise, but for now be brave. Open the door and politely answer their questions. Tell them your mom went out to buy milk and will be back soon. Buy me some time." Claire swallowed her sobs. "Okay. I'm hanging up now so I can drive. Be strong, Claire." The line went silent. Claire replaced the receiver and wiped her tears with her sleeve. Thomas was coming. He'd promised to help. The way back felt even longer. When she reached the building, she climbed the fire escape again carefully. Once she got to the bathroom window, she saw it was still open. She slipped inside silently. The knocking had stopped. Claire listened closely and heard voices in the hallway. They were talking about breaking down the door. Her stomach lurched. Making a quick decision, she went to the closet and opened the door. Leo was still there, curled up as she'd left him, his big eyes scared in the dim light. "Come on, Leo," she whispered, taking his hand. "We have to answer some people. Don't be scared, okay? Thomas is coming to help." "The food man?" Leo asked. Claire nodded. "Yes. He said he'll help us." Still holding her brother's hand, Claire approached the front door. She could hear the woman outside talking to someone about calling the landlord to open it. With her heart racing, Claire turned the key in the lock and opened the door. The woman in the navy blazer looked genuinely surprised. Her face, which Claire had imagined to be stern and scary, actually had soft features and kind eyes behind red-framed glasses. "Hello," she said, lowering herself to Claire's eye level. "You must be Claire. And this is Leo." She smiled at the boy, who hid behind his sister. "Yes," Claire answered, trying to sound casual. "Sorry it took a while." "I was in the bathroom." The woman nodded, though her look suggested she didn't fully believe that. "My name is Andrea. May I come in so we can talk?" Claire hesitated, then stepped aside. Andrea entered, followed by the man in the suit, who introduced himself as her supervisor. The apartment, though modest, was surprisingly clean and organized. Claire worked hard to keep it tidy, especially after the deliveries from Thomas started arriving, including cleaning supplies. "Where is your mother, Claire?" Andrea asked, looking around. "She went out to buy milk." Claire repeated the story Thomas had suggested. "She should be back soon." Andrea and the supervisor exchanged glances. "How long has she been gone?" Claire shrugged, trying to look unconcerned. "Not long. She left a little while ago." Andrea sat down on the apartment's only sofa, an old but well-maintained piece. "Claire, we received a call saying you and your brother live here alone. Is that true?" "No," Claire lied. "Our mom lives here with us." "And your dad?" "Never met him." Andrea jotted something in a small notebook. "When your mom goes out, who watches you?" "I watch Leo," Claire said proudly. "I know how to cook and everything." That seemed to concern Andrea even more. "How old are you, Claire?" "6, she answered, then quickly added, "Almost 7. "And do you take care of your brother often when your mom is gone?" Claire realized she was entering dangerous territory. "Not much," she mumbled. "Only when it's necessary." The supervisor, who had been checking the apartment, returned to the living room. "There are no adult clothes in the closet," he reported quietly to Andrea. Claire's heart sank. They were figuring it out. Thomas needed to get there soon. As if in answer to her prayers, a loud knock sounded at the open door of the apartment. Standing there in the hallway was Thomas Berger, immaculate in his expensive suit, looking composed but showing signs he had rushed. "Can I help you?" he asked, stepping into the apartment with the confidence of someone perfectly entitled to be there. Andrea and the supervisor looked confused. "And you are?" "Thomas Berger, the Morgan family's attorney," he replied without hesitation. "I was informed there were representatives from Child Protective Services here." Claire almost dropped her jaw. Thomas, an attorney. He'd told her he was the owner of supermarkets. "Mr. Berger," Andrea stood up, extending her hand. "Andrea Williams. We're here because of an anonymous tip about potentially neglected children." "I see," Thomas said, shaking her hand briefly. May I ask the specific nature of this allegation? Andrea hesitated. Well, we received information that these children might be living here alone, without adult supervision. Thomas frowned, looking genuinely offended. That's absurd. Eliza Morgan is a dedicated mother who works hard to support her children. Unfortunately, her work schedule can be challenging, which may have led to this misunderstanding. Claire watched Thomas, impressed by how convincingly he lied. Even so, Andrea continued, we haven't found any sign of an adult in this apartment. No adult clothing, no personal items. Because after a difficult divorce, Eliza had to simplify, Thomas explained smoothly. She keeps most of her belongings at her sister's place, where she often bathes after work to save on the water bill. Andrea didn't look convinced. Mr. Berger, we appreciate your presence, but we need to speak with Ms. Morgan directly. Perfectly understandable, Thomas replied. I've already contacted her. Unfortunately, she's stuck at work right now and asked me to come represent her. I realize this isn't ideal, but I can assure you I'll be working with the family to address any legitimate concerns you may have. The supervisor stepped forward. Even if everything you say is true, Mr. Berger, we have a duty to ensure these children's safety. A 6-year-old girl shouldn't be taking care of a 3-year-old on her own, regardless of the circumstances. Thomas nodded seriously. I completely agree. That's why we're already making changes. I hired a nanny who starts tomorrow, and we're rearranging Mrs. Morgan's work schedule so she can spend more time at home. Claire could hardly believe what she was hearing. Where were these stories coming from? Mr. Berger, Andrea said after a pause, normally, without speaking to the legal guardian, we'd have to place the children in a temporary shelter until we can clarify the situation. Claire's stomach twisted with fear. Leo, sensing her tension, clung to her more tightly. I understand the protocol, Thomas said, but I ask you to consider an alternative. I can take the children to my house tonight, where I have a guest room ready. Ms. Morgan can meet them there tomorrow morning. It would save them the trauma of a night in a strange shelter. Andrea and the supervisor exchanged glances. Are you in any way related to these children, Mr. Berger? Asked the supervisor. I'm a close friend of the family, Thomas replied. Eliza and I have known each other for years, ever since she started attending my church. Claire tried to keep a straight face. Church? Thomas never mentioned going to church. This still isn't standard procedure, Andrea pointed out. I understand, Thomas said, but I also know the system is overwhelmed and that the children's well-being should come first. One night in a familiar environment with someone they know would be far less traumatic. Andrea sighed, clearly torn. We'd need to verify your credentials, Mr. Berger, and do a quick home visit to ensure your place is suitable for children. Perfectly reasonable, Thomas agreed, handing over a business card. Here's my address. I'm happy to cooperate in any way necessary. The next 45 minutes were a roller coaster for Claire. Tension filled the air, obvious even to her. Thomas spoke with the social workers, answered questions, made phone calls, all with impressive calm. To her surprise, Andrea eventually agreed to the temporary arrangement. Thomas would receive emergency custody for 72 hours, after which there would be a preliminary hearing with a judge. Claire, Andrea said kindly before leaving, if you need anything or if you feel scared or uncomfortable, you can call me any time. She handed Claire a card with her number. Claire took the card, nodding seriously. She had no intention of calling, but something about Andrea's kindness touched her. When the door finally closed behind the social workers, Claire let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Leo, exhausted by all the tension, had fallen asleep on the small sofa. How did you do that? She asked Thomas, her voice a mix of admiration and confusion. Thomas loosened his tie, finally looking a bit relieved. I learned a long time ago that confidence is half the battle. If you act like you know what you're doing, people tend to believe you. But all those lies, about my mom, about the church, they weren't lies, Thomas gently corrected. They were temporary solutions to a pressing problem. Now we have some time to think about a permanent solution. Claire frowned. They said we have to go to your house. Yes, Thomas confirmed. It's safer for now. If you stay here alone, they can come back any time, and next time, they might not be so lenient. The idea of leaving the apartment, the only place she knew as home, made Claire anxious. But what about our things? And what if my mom comes back and can't find us? Thomas knelt down to look her in the eye. Claire, we have to be honest with each other now. You told me your mom left 2 years ago. Is that really true? Claire looked away. Not exactly. How long has it really been? 3 months, she admitted in a low voice. But it feels like a lot longer. Thomas nodded, sympathetic. I can imagine. And do you have any idea where she might be? Claire shook her head. She said she was going to work and never came back. Her cell phone just goes to voicemail. Thomas took a deep breath. Let's do this. You come to my house tonight, as agreed with the social worker. Tomorrow, we start looking for your mom in earnest, and in the meantime, I'll talk to my lawyer, a real one, to figure out our options. You're not a lawyer. Thomas gave a faint smile. No, I own supermarkets, remember, but I know good lawyers. Claire watched Thomas with new eyes. He had lied to the social workers, risking his reputation, maybe even breaking the law, all to help her. Why? Why are you doing all this? She asked. What do you get out of helping us? The question seemed to catch Thomas by surprise. He stayed silent for a moment before answering. Not everything we do in life is for personal gain, Claire. Sometimes we help because we can, because it's the right thing to do. Claire didn't look convinced. In her short life experience, people always wanted something in return. Let's make a deal, Thomas proposed. You'll stay at my house for now, with no strings attached. If at any point you feel uncomfortable or unsafe, say so, and we'll find another solution. Deal. Claire looked at Leo sleeping on the sofa. Her little brother needed a safe place, regular meals, a real bed. If that meant trusting Thomas, maybe it was worth the risk. Deal, she finally agreed. Giles Darshawak later that night, after putting Claire and Leo to sleep in his comfortable guest suite, Thomas sat in his home office, phone pressed to his ear. You did what? Sophie's incredulous voice came through the line. It was an emergency, Thomas explained. There was no time to follow normal procedures. Tommy, you lied to social workers. You practically kidnapped 2 kids. I didn't kidnap anyone, he protested. I got legal emergency custody. They agreed to it. Based on false information. Sophie sounded like she was about to have a nervous breakdown. Do you have any idea of the legal implications? You could lose everything, your company, your reputation. Sophie, Thomas interrupted firmly, I'm aware of the risks, but I couldn't let them be taken to a shelter. You know how the system is. They could be stuck there for weeks, maybe even separated. There was a long sigh on the other end. Tommy, I understand your concern, but you haven't thought about the long-term consequences. What happens now? Are you going to raise these kids? Are you ready for that responsibility? The question hung in the air, heavy and challenging. Thomas glanced at the half-open office door toward the hallway leading to the room where Claire and Leo slept. Children who, until a few hours ago, were practically strangers. I don't know, he finally admitted, but I know I can't just abandon them. There are other ways to help without turning your life upside down, Sophie argued. You could fund a good foster family, ensure they stay together, supervise their progress. It was a sensible, practical suggestion, the kind of solution Thomas normally would appreciate, but for some reason, simply handing over his responsibility to someone else didn't feel right. I'll think about it, he promised. For now, I'm focusing on finding their mother. Claire says she disappeared 3 months ago. No explanation, no warning. That's concerning, Sophie agreed. Have you contacted the police? I'll do it tomorrow, and I'll also speak with a family law attorney. After hanging up, Thomas sat in silence for a long time. Sophie was right. Was he really prepared for this? It wasn't just about providing a roof food or clothes. Children needed emotional stability, guidance, love. Thomas quietly walked to the guest room door and peeked inside. Claire and Leo were fast asleep. The little boy snuggled against his sister, as if seeking protection even in his dreams. Something inside Thomas twisted at the sight. They were so small, so vulnerable. Claire, only 6, carrying a burden even many adults would find too heavy. He realized then that financial security alone wasn't enough. These children needed more than that. They needed someone who truly cared, someone who was present, not just with material resources, but also with time, patience, understanding. Thomas gently closed the door and returned to his office. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he knew one thing. He couldn't simply hand Claire and Leo over to the system like inconvenient parcels. Whatever he decided in the long run, for now he was committed to helping them as best he could, even if it meant rethinking everything he knew about his own life and priorities. Maxwell Hudson's office, one of the most respected family lawyers in the city, overlooked Central Park. It was an elegant space with shelves of law books lined up perfectly and brown leather chairs that looked as expensive as they were comfortable. Thomas adjusted his tie as the attorney flipped through the documents in front of him. "Everything seems in order, Mr. Berger," Maxwell said, looking up over his reading glasses. "The social worker's report is surprisingly positive, considering the initial circumstances. She specifically mentions the bond the children have developed with you over these past 2 months." Thomas nodded, trying not to show the mix of anxiety and hope he felt. The last 8 weeks had been an emotional roller coaster. After that night when the social workers showed up, he had hired investigators to locate Eliza Morgan, but they found nothing. It was as if she had vanished. With no immediate alternatives, he requested temporary custody of the children, which was granted after several hearings and evaluations. During that time, his life changed completely. From a solitary executive obsessed with schedules and efficiency, Thomas had become an impromptu guardian, learning on the job about school lunches, nightmares, and the boundless energy of a 3-year-old. His morning meetings now had to wait until after cartoons and colorful cereals. "So what do you think our chances are?" Thomas asked, pulling himself back to the present. Maxwell took off his glasses and placed them carefully on the desk. "For a permanent adoption, excellently high. You have the resources, stability, and you clearly care about the children. The mother's prolonged absence, with no attempt at contact, strongly favors you. Plus," he added with a small smile, "judges generally appreciate when successful business people demonstrate this kind of social responsibility." Thomas frowned slightly. He wasn't doing this to impress anyone or improve his public image. In fact, he'd kept the situation as discreet as possible, even among his employees. "When can we file the formal paperwork?" "We can submit it next week," Maxwell replied, "but I must warn you, even under the best circumstances, this will take time. And if, by any chance, the biological mother reappears during the process, things could get quite complicated." Thomas had already considered that possibility many times. Part of him feared Eliza Morgan would return and demand the children. Another part, a part he rarely acknowledged, hoped she was safe, for Claire and Leo's sake. "I understand the risks," he said, "but I believe it's the best option for the children." "And what do they think about adoption?" A genuine smile tugged at Thomas's lips as he thought of them. "Leo is happy. To him, it still seems like one big adventure, a new home, a bedroom full of toys, a yard to play in. Claire." He hesitated. "Claire took longer to adapt, but last night, while I was reading them a story, she said she'd like to stay with me forever." That moment had deeply moved Thomas. After weeks of caution and suspicion, Claire had finally dropped her guard entirely. That night, for the first time, she'd hugged him spontaneously before bed. "I like the new school," she had said, snuggling against his chest, "and I like that you always pick me up on time." Such a simple comment, yet so revealing. For Claire, reliability was a form of love, something stripped away from her when her mother disappeared. Maxwell smiled. That's wonderful. Their testimony will be important in the proceedings. Leaving the office, Thomas felt lighter, more confident. The idea of adopting Claire and Leo, initially a practical solution to a complex problem, now felt absolutely right. These children had filled a gap in his life he hadn't known was there. In his car, he checked the time. He'd promised Claire and Leo he would pick them up from school and take them out for ice cream before heading home. It was Friday, and they'd made a habit of this little ritual every week. The elementary school was a cheerful red brick building with a large yard where children of various ages played under the supervision of monitors. Thomas parked and walked to the gate, where other mums and dads waited. Some recognized him and waved. In the early days, when he'd first started picking Claire up, he'd noticed curious and even judgmental stares. A single businessman with 2 kids was unusual, but over time he had become just another parent. "Mr. Berger," greeted Claire's teacher, Mrs. Martinez, approaching him with a smile. "Claire did a wonderful job on the science project today. She has a natural talent for observation." Thomas felt a surge of pride he had never experienced with any professional achievement. "She's been working on it all week. She's fascinated by plants." When the bell rang, groups of noisy children began pouring out. Leo, who attended preschool in the same complex pool, was the first to appear, running toward Thomas with outstretched arms. "Thomas, Thomas, look what I made!" he shouted, waving a colorful drawing. Thomas crouched to scoop him up, examining the picture with exaggerated enthusiasm. "Wow, that's amazing, Leo. That's the best dragon I've ever seen." "It's not a dragon, it's a dinosaur," Leo corrected, laughing. "Ah, right. Now I see the difference." Thomas smiled, gently tapping the boy's nose. Soon Claire emerged, walking calmly and carrying her purple backpack. Unlike her brother, she was more reserved in public, but her eyes lit up when she saw Thomas. "How was class today?" he asked as they headed to the car. "Good. We did an experiment with plants. The teacher said mine grew the fastest." "That's great, Claire. You might have a special talent for plants." She shrugged, but a small, proud smile crossed her face. On the way to the ice cream shop, Leo chattered non-stop about his day, new friends, how he was the first to finish his snack. Claire chimed in with the occasional thoughtful comment. Thomas watched them in the rearview mirror, feeling a warmth in his chest that still surprised him. In just 2 months, these kids had become the center of his world. His life before them, strict routines, endless meetings, lonely nights in a luxurious apartment, now seemed strangely empty. "Thomas," Claire's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Yes, Claire. We're going to stay with you forever, right?" The question, asked so earnestly, took Thomas by surprise. He caught her eyes in the mirror. "If you both want that, and if the judge agrees, yes." "Does the judge boss all the families around?" Leo asked, confused. Thomas smiled. "Not exactly. He just helps decide what's best for children in situations like yours." "And what's best for us is staying with you," Claire stated firmly. "Because you protect us and you love us." The last part came out almost like a question, as though Claire still wasn't completely sure. "Yes, I do love both of you," Thomas replied, his voice catching. "Very much." The rest of the drive was comfortably quiet. At the ice cream shop, Leo got his usual chocolate with chocolate topping and chocolate sprinkles. Claire, more adventurous, tried pistachio for the first time. Thomas watched them happily, thinking he finally understood what family was. When they arrived home, a real house Thomas had bought a month earlier, trading in his city apartment for a spacious residence with a yard, they spotted a car parked out front. A compact model, clearly used. Thomas didn't recognize it. "Whose car is that?" Claire asked, noticing it first. "I'm not sure," Thomas replied, a slight worry creeping in. They weren't expecting anyone that afternoon. As they approached the front door, Thomas saw a woman sitting on the porch steps. She stood up when he parked. She was thin, with shoulder-length brown hair, wearing simple jeans and a blue blouse. Thomas got out, instinctively positioning himself protectively between her and the children. "Can I help you?" he asked. The woman took a step forward, her eyes fixed not on Thomas but on the children getting out of the car. Her lips trembled slightly. "Claire." "Leo." Her voice was almost a whisper. Claire froze, eyes wide with shock. Leo, too young to fully grasp the situation, just stared curiously. "Mom." Claire's voice came out strained. Thomas felt as if the world had stopped. Eliza Morgan. It had to be her. The resemblance to Claire was obvious. The same large eyes, the same face shape. "Oh my God, you've grown so much," Eliza said, tears beginning to roll down her cheeks. She took another step toward them. Claire immediately backed away, hiding behind Thomas. Leo, confused, looked from the stranger to Claire, trying to understand. "Where were you?" Claire's voice was loud, accusatory. "You abandoned us?" Eliza closed her eyes, as if absorbing the blow. "I know it seems that way, my love, but it isn't true. I would never abandon you. Never." Thomas, recovering from his initial shock, took control of the situation. "Ms. Morgan, we weren't expecting you. Maybe we should continue this conversation inside." Eliza finally seemed to notice him. "Who are you? Why are my kids with you?" "Thomas Berger, Miss Morgan. I found Claire and Leo living alone 2 months ago. I've had temporary custody since then." Eliza's eyes widened. 2 months? They were alone for 2 months? Her voice cracked. "Oh God, I thought they were with Paula. She promised she'd take care of them." Thomas frowned. "Paula?" "My neighbor. I asked her to watch the kids when I was arrested. She swore she would look after them until I got out." Eliza covered her face with her hands, sobbing. "I was in jail for almost 3 months for something I didn't do." Claire, still hiding behind Thomas, shouted, "You're lying." "You've been gone for 2 years." Eliza lifted her head, confusion on her face. 2 years? No, Claire. It's been less than 3 months. I would never, ever stay away from you that long." Thomas started to understand. Claire had lied about the timeline, maybe to protect herself, maybe to justify the sense of abandonment. 3 months for a 6-year-old might feel like an eternity. "Let's go inside," Thomas suggested again, more firmly. "The children need a moment to process this, and I think we all have a lot to talk about." Inside the house, Thomas led the children to the living room while Eliza waited in the kitchen. Leo, still confused, clung to Claire, who wore a guarded expression with crossed arms. "Claire, Leo," Thomas began, kneeling in front of them, "I know this is a huge surprise. I understand you're confused and maybe scared, but we need to hear what your mother has to say." "She's not our mom anymore," Claire declared firmly. "She left us." Thomas took a deep breath. "Claire, sometimes things aren't exactly what they seem. Your mom said she was in jail. That means she couldn't be with you, even if she wanted to." "Then why didn't she send someone to get us? Why didn't anyone come?" Claire insisted, tears starting to form in her eyes. "That's what we need to find out. But we can't do it if we don't talk to her." Leo, who had been silent, tugged on Thomas's sleeve. "I want to see Mommy," he said quietly. "I miss her." Claire looked at her brother with a mix of protectiveness and betrayal. "Leo, you barely remember her. You were too little." "I do remember," Leo insisted. "She used to sing that bear song to me at bedtime." Thomas saw Claire waver, a crack in her emotional armor. "How about we all talk together? I'll be right there with you. If you feel uncomfortable, we can stop. I promise." After a tense moment, Claire reluctantly agreed. Thomas led the children to the kitchen, where Eliza was sitting rigidly at the table, her eyes red from crying. "Mommy!" Leo ran to her as soon as he saw her, ignoring Claire's stifled protest. Eliza hugged him tightly, sobbing into his hair. "My baby, you've grown so much." Claire stayed next to Thomas, refusing to get closer. Thomas suggested they all sit, then asked Eliza to explain her story. "I was working as a waitress at the Blue Moon," she began, holding Leo on her lap. It didn't pay much, but it was steady. One day, the manager accused me of stealing from the cash register. I hadn't done anything, but he called the police. They found drugs in my locker. Someone planted them there. I've never used drugs in my life, but no one believed me. Eliza wiped her eyes. I was arrested that night. They allowed me one phone call, and I called Paula, our neighbor. I begged her to take care of you, to explain what was happening. She promised she would do that, and that she would visit me in jail to update me on how you were. Thomas watched her closely, looking for signs of deceit, but Eliza seemed genuinely devastated. But Paula never came. Not once. I begged for more phone calls, but couldn't get them for weeks. When I finally called home, nobody answered. I panicked, but I couldn't do anything from jail. Claire, listening with a closed expression, finally spoke. Paula moved away 2 weeks after you disappeared. She said she got a new job in another city. Eliza covered her mouth with her hand. Oh God, you two were alone that whole time. How did you survive? I took care of Leo, Claire said proudly, defiant. I cooked, kept the place clean, took what we needed to survive. Tears streamed down Eliza's face again. Claire, my love, you should never have had to do that. I'm so sorry, so sorry. You said you were released recently, Thomas interjected, sensing the need for more facts. Eliza nodded. 3 days ago, they finally proved the drugs weren't mine. A new employee admitted he saw the manager planting them in my locker. He was skimming money and needed a scapegoat. Claire, still resistant, asked, How did you find us here? I went back to our apartment, but it was empty. The landlord said kids had lived there alone for a while. Then a man in a suit came and took them. I searched everywhere until a parent at your old school mentioned you were now attending a new one with a Mr. Berger. Silence fell over the kitchen. Leo, oblivious to the tension, played contentedly with the buttons on his mother's blouse. Claire kept her gaze down, though Thomas could see tears rolling silently down her cheeks. Claire, Eliza called softly, I know you must be so angry at me. You have every right, but please know I never, ever abandoned you or Leo on purpose. You two are my whole life. Claire didn't respond or look up. Thomas realized he was at a crossroads. Everything he'd planned, the adoption, a new life with the children, was suddenly in jeopardy. But looking at Eliza, seeing her raw pain and obvious love for her kids, he knew what he had to do. Ms. Morgan, where are you staying? He asked. Eliza looked embarrassed. At a shelter on the east side. It's all I can afford right now. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. I have a proposal. Why don't you stay here for a few days? There's a guest room available. It'll give you time to reconnect with the kids, and we can discuss next steps calmly. Surprise was clear on Eliza's face. Why would you do that? You don't even know me. I know your children, Thomas replied simply, and they deserve a chance to have their mother back. And the following days were a delicate dance of emotions. Eliza settled into the guest room, and Thomas reshuffled his schedule to be around as much as possible. Leo accepted his mother back instantly, as if the months of separation had never happened. Claire, however, kept her distance, watching Eliza warily. Thomas quickly saw that Eliza was an intelligent, dedicated woman who had been dealt a terrible hand. She loved her children deeply, but now faced enormous challenges to rebuild her life. No home, no job, and a recent arrest on her record. One evening, after the children were asleep, Thomas and Eliza talked on the porch. I don't know how to thank you for everything, she said, gazing at the stars. You saved my children when I couldn't be there. They're amazing kids, Thomas replied. You must have done a great job with them before it all happened. Eliza smiled sadly. I tried my best. It was always tough, being a single mom with no family. But we were happy, you know, we had enough. Thomas exhaled. Eliza, I've been thinking. I know you want to rebuild your life with the kids, and that's the most important thing, but you're going to face many obstacles. I know, she answered resolutely, but I'll do whatever it takes. I'll find a job. a place for us to live. What if I help? Thomas offered. Not as charity, but as an investment in Claire and Leo's future. Eliza frowned. What exactly are you suggesting? I have a vacant apartment in a safe neighborhood, near a good school. You and the kids could live there while you get back on your feet. And I can offer you a job in administration at one of my stores. A decent salary, hours that align with the kids' school schedule. Why would you do that? Eliza interrupted, her eyes probing. What's in it for you? Thomas considered the question. In the beginning, when I caught Claire stealing at my supermarket, it was impulsive. Something about her reminded me of myself as a kid. But now, I care about them. I want them to be happy and safe, even if that means helping them return to you instead of staying with me. Eliza studied him for a long moment. It seems Claire was in good hands with you, and she'll be in even better hands with her mother, Thomas replied, as long as you have what you need to take proper care of them. Over the next few days, Thomas helped Eliza get organized. The apartment was modestly furnished but had everything they needed. Eliza started working at a nearby store's administrative office, proving herself efficient and dedicated. Thomas hired a family therapist to guide them through the reunification process, especially to help Claire, who still held back. With patience and counseling, Eliza learned how to regain her daughter's trust. Small gestures, a special braid before school, cooking her favorite meal, reading a bedtime story, slowly rebuilt their bond. Thomas watched from a respectful distance, feeling a bittersweet mix of pride and loss. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after Eliza's reappearance, Thomas got an unexpected call. Mr. Berger, it was Claire's voice. Mom said I can call you if I want. Of course, Claire, is something wrong? No, it's just... There was a pause. Just wanted to say everything's okay here. Mom made mac and cheese last night, the way I like it, and she didn't yell when Leo spilled juice on the couch. Thomas smiled, understanding what Claire was really saying. That's great, Claire. Sounds like you're all settling in. Yeah, she agreed. Thomas, you'll come visit us, right? His heart squeezed. Whenever you want me to. Cool. Another pause. Mom wants to talk to you. Eliza took the phone. Thomas, I wanted to invite you to dinner on Sunday. The kids miss you. And I'd like to thank you in person for everything. Thomas accepted the invitation, hanging up with conflicted emotions. Part of him still wished Claire and Leo were his kids. Another part knew he was doing the right thing. You seem surprisingly calm for someone who just gave up on adopting 2 children, Sophie said over lunch that week. I haven't given up on them, Thomas corrected. I just found a better way to help. Sophie shook her head in admiration. You realize most people in your position would have fought for custody. They'd have used their money and influence to keep the children. And would that have been better for whom? Me, maybe. But for Claire and Leo, they have a mother who loves them. A mother who made mistakes, yes, but who deserves a second chance. You did something truly significant, Tommy, Sophie said, reaching for her brother's hand. You not only helped those kids when they needed it, but you also helped a family rebuild. That's rare. The following months brought a new normal. Eliza thrived at her job, eventually being promoted to assistant manager. The apartment Thomas provided became a real home, with the children's drawings on the walls and plants in the windows. Claire had a green thumb. Thomas remained present in their lives, but respectfully distant. He was invited to Sunday dinners, school performances, birthday parties. He became like an uncle to the children, a role he accepted with gratitude. A particularly important moment came when Claire, during one of those Sunday dinners, finally called Eliza Mom again. It was a simple moment. Claire just asked, Mom, can I have more juice? But Eliza's eyes filled with tears, and Thomas felt a wave of emotion at witnessing that crucial step in their reconciliation. Thank you, Eliza whispered to Thomas later, while the kids watched a movie in the living room. Without you, I might have lost my children forever. Thomas only smiled. The journey hadn't been easy, But every little triumph made it worthwhile. One spring afternoon, about a year after Eliza's return, Thomas was invited to a picnic in the park. When he arrived, he saw Claire running across the grass, chasing a kite Leo was trying to fly. Eliza was spreading a plaid blanket under a large tree. "Thomas," Leo shouted upon seeing him, dropping the kite and running over. "Did you bring the ice cream you promised?" Thomas laughed, holding up a bag. "Right here, champ, and I brought a surprise for your sister too." Claire approached, not running like Leo, but walking quickly, clearly excited. At 7E, she was taller now, and her face had lost some of its premature seriousness that had first touched Thomas. "What is it? What did you bring?" she asked curiously. Thomas took out a small children's gardening kit, colorful gloves, tools the right size for her hands, and packets of sunflower seeds. Claire's eyes lit up. "Thank you, Thomas," she exclaimed, giving him a spontaneous hug. While hugs from Claire were no longer rare, each one still warmed his heart. As the kids explored their new gifts, Thomas sat down on the blanket beside Eliza. "They look so happy," he said. Eliza smiled, her eyes filled with a peace that hadn't been there when they first met. "They are happy. And I owe that to you." Thomas shook his head. "No. You rebuilt this family, Eliza. I just gave it a nudge. A nudge that changed our lives," she insisted. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if someone else had found Claire that day. Someone who'd just called security or worse. But it was me," Thomas said simply. Maybe it was meant to be. They watched Claire and Leo playing on the grass, their laughter echoing through the park. Claire was running freely now, without the weight of the world on her small shoulders. Leo was growing up secure, surrounded by love, and Eliza had regained not only her children but her dignity and self-confidence. During the picnic, Eliza shared some news. She had been accepted into a training program that could lead her to a full managerial position within 6 months. Her eyes sparkled as she spoke of the future. Maybe they could even buy a small house in a few years. "And all because you believed in me when no one else did," Eliza concluded, her voice thick with emotion. Thomas smiled. "I believed in the kids first, and then I believed in you." As evening approached, Leo fell asleep on the picnic blanket, worn out from running around. Claire sat nearby, carefully planting her first sunflower seeds in a small pot they'd brought along. Her face shone with a peace that had once been rare. "Thomas Ewell," she called, not taking her eyes off her task. "Thank you for going to the supermarket that day." The simplicity of that statement moved him deeply. "I'm the one who should thank you, Claire. You taught me a lot." A few minutes later, Claire ran to her mother to show off her finished work. Eliza hugged her proudly, kissing the top of her head. It was a scene that, a year ago, would have seemed impossible. Claire running freely into her mother's arms, full of trust and security. Thomas watched from a distance, feeling a satisfaction no business success had ever given him. His life had changed forever since that security meeting, which now felt like it happened in another lifetime. He still ran his company efficiently, still had his organized routine, but now there was room for more. Room for connections, emotions, and the unexpected. In the distance, the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the park. Claire waved at him from across the grass, carefully holding her pot of sunflower seeds. Eliza gently roused Leo, who rubbed his sleepy eyes. They were a family, a true family, rebuilt brick by brick after nearly being destroyed. Thomas waved back, knowing he'd made the right choice.